Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast, Mountain Buck Q&A edition, brought to you by Timber Ninja Outdoors. The way that these podcasts work, they're a little bit different than your traditional interview style podcasts that come out on every Tuesday. These ones are specifically based off of your questions that you send in a short 10 to 20 minute format. Try to go through and answer these questions to the best of my ability based off of some of my personal experiences. Now, this is going to be the last one that I'm going to do for a while, but I will say keep sending in the questions, saving all of them. This isn't the last time I'll do one of these episodes, it's just the last time for a little while here. So if you want to send in those questions, you can either comment on the YouTube videos of the Mountain Buck Q&As or send it into my email, beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com. Make sure you put in the subject line Mountain Buck Q&A. All right, so on this week's episode, we have a question coming in from Josh S. Josh wrote in, "Hey, Beau, I can get pictures of some really nice bucks, but struggle to find out where they are bedded to get close enough in daylight. How do you go about finding where they are bedded?" So let me start off by saying that what I'm about to say, these are not rules. As with anything with deer hunting, this is just how I like to do it and have found success finding bucks, but there's plenty of different ways to do it. This is just based off of my experience. I use three different ways, or I guess a three-step approach to try and figure out where a buck is bedded. Once I locate them on camera, or maybe I saw them in person, got a visual on them in a travel area, feeding area, etc. And this is for outside of the rut. So in your traditional kind of pattern type times of early season and late season. So the first thing that I'm going to do is look at maps, so e-scouting. And I like to do this on a desktop versus on your phone. You can see things a little bit better. So I'll pull up Spartan Forge and look at the map at where that I got that picture from or where I saw that deer at. And I want to, first you got to look at the time of the picture or video and the direction of travel. And that'll help dictate where I start looking at a map. And I want to start finding terrain and or vegetation features that look like good bedding habitat. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is, if I have a video or picture, I'm going to look at the historical wind for the day of the photo, seeing what the weather was like. Was it a cold front? Was he likely to be moving earlier on that day? Is that the only reason why I only got him this one time? What are the reasons here? And also I want to see what that direction is, because that'll help me dictate where I think he's potentially bedding. With bucks and really, specifically with bucks, a lot of times they like to have a visual advantage in their bed. They like to have a wind advantage, and they also like to have an auditory or security advantage, so that they have cover to their back. If something's sneaking up on them or coming at them, they can have that. So I'll look, and so after I look at the historical wind for the day of the photo, I'll also look at the historical predominant wind direction with Spartan Forge for the month that I plan on be hunting. So if you're in the Spartan Forge app, you can go in and under the Intel tab, go in and go to historical wind, and then go by the month. And depending on where your little cursor is, it'll pull the data from that specific location. So you'll see this wind map and seeing like, okay, it's predominantly a southwest wind at this time of year, or a westerly wind, or a northwest wind. And that can help try to give you the most, I guess, information on where he is likely to be bedded for most of the time. And so I'm going to start by marking obvious places like points of ridges, where the reason why, they like points of ridges a lot is because they can see 270 degrees around. They've got the predominant wind blowing over their back, the daytime thermals coming up. It's just a really good location. The one thing about that is a lot of the obvious ridges and points and stuff may have deer on it and may have bucks on it, but sometimes other hunters find that stuff, and it may not have the cover and all the things that look so good on the map. Sometimes they line up perfectly, other times they don't. So then that's when I start looking at places that are a little bit harder to find. So these micro points, which a micro point is just a smaller version that might jet off the main point, might be super small, tough to see. Turn your contour lines onto 10-foot intervals so you can see any small change in that terrain, and have slope angle on so you can see where a drop off is, where they can lay on top of it, look down over. If something comes behind them, they can drop down over the ridge and be gone and no problem at all. Some other places are smaller benches, steep drains that, when I say a steep drain, kind of a steep draw that might be choked with laurel or briars or something that's thick that they may be there. And then really just places to avoid human pressure. So I'm going to mark those places, and how far away I look on the map from the location of the photo or where I found that deer at is going to depend on when the time of that picture was. I mentioned earlier, but if your picture is at midnight or 2 a.m, you may be looking a little bit further away than if your picture was within an hour or two of daylight. In that case, they might be a lot closer. So after I do that, now it's time for boots on the ground, getting in there, head towards these places, and start scouting. Now, if it's during the season, be aware of the wind while you're scouting. You don't want to completely blow it out. Try to scout it with the wind in your favor and not messing up what where the buck could potentially be bedding and be bumping them. And so as I'm moving towards these directions, I'm working backwards from the point of the photo and working backwards, whether it's following some of these deer trails to this place or just heading towards that direction in general, but trying to use travel areas to understand how they may move through this location. And now I'm looking for scrapes, rub clusters, anything like that in those areas, and paying attention to what the cover looks like. So one thing you can't really do that good on a map now with leaf-off imagery and good imagery, you can see some things, like you can see laurel patches, you can see things that will have cover to them, you can see logging cuts, all of that kind of stuff, but you can't see all of it, and that's why the boots on the ground section is so important. So and as you start going through there, rubs will dictate a travel area, but clusters of rubs, you start seeing them not just on a single path, but starting to be around in an area and say a 40, 50 yard circle. Now you're starting to get into an area where this buck is spending more time, maybe getting up from his bed, feeding a little bit, rubbing some trees, marking his territory as he heads out to feed for the day. So as you start getting to that type of sign, that's a little bit more indicative of a place that they might spend some daylight activity. Now, not all bucks leave a lot of sign, so keep that in mind as you're looking for these things. But that's kind of the first step to being able to do that. And with rubs, if you're hunting a mature buck and you see the pictures and he's got tall tines, he's got big brow tines, maybe you're looking for some of those gouges in the tree. And if it's a mature buck, so bigger body, the rubs are going to be a little bit higher up on the trees. Those are some ways to be able to understand, okay, this might be from this buck or another good deer versus just any buck that could be leaving some of the sign behind. And so another thing I'll say is if you get the picture on a cell cam or you see the deer in person, so some real-time intel, that's where I'm going to try to get in there as soon as possible and identify the track and look for the track of the deer to be able to signify. If you can match up a track to a specific deer, you've unlocked so many more opportunities because you can go anywhere. And if you're able to find another track that lines up with a unique track, now you know it's that deer. You don't need the trail cameras. You don't need anything. You can use woodsmanship skills and be able to identify that. So make sure you take a picture of that track if you are able to find it. Now, there's a lot of situations where you aren't able to do that. Dry leaves are hard to be able to do it. Rocky areas, things along those lines. That's why I love being able to do this in the winter when you have snow. So much easier to be able to do this and backtrack that deer. Now, another thing is finding a specific bed is great, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of deer that I've learned where they're bedding at, but I don't ever find the specific bed that I feel like they're spending all this time in. And a lot of times I find that bucks will use multiple beds in an area. So finding that area versus a specific bed for me is more important, and then being able to look at that scenario and figure out how you would set up based on the wind. Where do you think he might be bedding within this area because of the wind, the the weather, all of these different things to be able to hone in a little bit more. Now, the last thing, the third step in here is moving trail cameras. So when using trail cameras, I'll place these cameras around these key areas. So whether that's scrapes or minor trails with rubs, around these areas where you think he could be bedding, on entry and exit trails. And I'll say don't get too worked up if you don't get him on camera. I mean, I get it wrong more than I get it right. And most of the time, I'm still not that far off. Your camera is only viewing a small area. If you think about it, it's just viewing this area that's in front of you, in front of the camera. And there's so much places around there. I've seen it in person where deer will walk right behind a camera or use a trail that's around there but not going through that specific spot. So don't worry as much about that. Let the sign tell you. Let your intuition and what your gut feeling is telling you about some of these deer versus always needing that 100% confirmation from cameras. So they can only really see, the small area. Now, when using cameras, if you have cell service, you can get real-time information with cell cameras, but I've normally left regular cameras soak in these places for the whole season or for a longer period of time, and many times just didn't even check them till after the season, which makes looking for these deer a multiple year approach and trying to learn it versus being able to figure it out right then and there. So that's where, from a camera strategy side of things, it can be up in the air. But like I said, cell cameras can help with that. It's just, I know at least most of the places that I hunt either don't have cell service or don't have good cell service. So I can't use those in a lot of these situations. So it's not a necessity to be able to do that, but it does help. And so I mostly hunt these areas based on reading sign and assumptions with using those cameras as a bonus, but not a reliance. Cell cameras are cool, but don't put a whole lot of weight on them. So with all that being said, the 3-step approach that I have to trying to be able to locate them is the first one with being able to look at maps, going through and trying to locate areas I think they could be bedding, and then getting boots on the ground, checking these places out, and then lastly by throwing cameras up and trying to get some confirmation on it. Some deer are easier than others to be able to figure out, depending on if there's sparse cover. You're like, all right, probably coming from that area. He's within an hour of daylight, coming to feed on these acorns, probably coming from there. It's easier to pinpoint versus an area where you get them on a travel pattern and it's a lot of browse around, not as much of a destination food source. It might take longer, it might take years to be able to figure it out. But when I look at trying to figure out these deer, this is a 3-step approach that I have to be able to to go in and try to locate them. So hopefully that helped you out a little bit. And I think I'm going to have to do another video at some point where I'm actually going through and showing looking at maps, marking some areas, going in and finding this stuff to actually be able to show you a little bit versus just talking about it. But again, hopefully this helped you out. If you like this podcast, if you like these Q&A episodes, please let me know. Really appreciate it. And leave a rating and review. Tell your friends and family. All that stuff helps out so much. And with that being said, I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.